discusses how to add a buyer to the TrackDrive platform, and if you already have a buyer, what the attribute sections of the buyer record are. So I'm going to go ahead into setup here. And there's two ways to add a buyer. The preferred way is, once you have the system running, is to go to the offer that you're trying to add a buyer to, and in the call handling area, the part that's going to route to buyers here, I could come in and edit that, click on new buyer right here, and in line I can create a buyer, new buyer, or copy from another buyer, and then that will add it to the call flow automatically, which eventually, once we're done with our UX completely, you'll have only offers and reports on the menu, so you'll have to go into offers, create offers, and add buyers on the fly like this. But I am going to, for purposes of this demo, show you, imagine we don't have all these buyers, how to add a buyer, your first buyer. So I'm going to click on add a buyer, and I say create a new buyer. Now we are an international phone system, so you will have to use the country code when you're putting in a phone number. So +1 for America, +4 for United Kingdom. Whatever country you're dealing with, you have to go ahead and use the country code. Before I get into it, if you are trying to forward to someone via SIP, once you key in SIP:, it will change the screen a bit so that you can key in SIP information to route calls to your buyers via VoIP or SIP. But I'm going to go back to the doing a phone number here. So I'm going to do +1 and make something up for this demo. And the buyer ID, I can either do DEFL for like DEF lending, or if I'm trying to interface to another tracking system like LinkTrust, Has Offers, Cake, whatever, our webhooks that are going to interface to their pixel tracking systems, we would have to match the buyer ID to their advertiser ID or merchant ID or buyer ID or whatever they call it on their system. So if you're using LinkTrust, for example, and that number was 123,876, then that's what you'd put in here for the buyer ID, because that's going to match their advertiser ID. Now the name of the buyer doesn't have to match any other tracking system, and I'm just going to call this DEF Lending, and whatever time zone they are. Now I like to use the time zone of the buyer, because if you invite the buyer to collaborate, they are going to be seeing their hours of operation, and you're going to have a lot more questions when they're in Pacific time and they're like, hey, I'm not open from Eastern time noon to 9, I'm open Pacific time 9 to 6 or whatever. So I always go ahead and do whatever's on the insertion order from the buyer so that it's not so confusing for them. And then paused and unpaused, that's obvious here. So I'll hit next step. Now I do have other videos. I'm going to go over the rest of this, so when you click the Need Help button, there'll be videos here that you can look at for the rest of the buyer record. I'm just going over the adding a new buyer in the attributes section. So in this section, we already did all this stuff. Pause and unpause, that's obvious. Some people, if you're adding the buyer on the fly in the offer itself, you might want to start and pause so you can fix this stuff first, and then once you're all fixed, unpause the buyer, he's ready to go. Now one of the things that we use are filters to route the calls properly. So one of the most common filters would be the geo, that in America, for example, they only take certain states or don't take certain states. So let's say this is the student loan one, so it'd be easier to say what they don't take, and let's say it was Illinois, oops, and New York. And then they also say later, hey, after some time I'm running and I really hate this traffic source, or I really like this traffic source, or whatever. So I'm going to say he doesn't like, let's say it's Jerry Jones, Dallas call suppliers. He doesn't like Jerry Jones leads or calls. So he's going to say, I don't want that guy anymore. So he's identified bad calls. Maybe they're SMS calls and he doesn't like SMS, so you have to exclude that traffic source. So that's what the filters do. It determines which calls the buyer can take in real time as we get the call in. The buyer suppression list, we do have 3 types of suppression list. Under calls, if I open that in a new tab, we have here suppression list. Now that's going to be your own suppression list that you are saying for all of your offers system-wide, you don't want those numbers called. So that's what the suppression list would be there. It also would block them even on inbound. You're blocking them from calling. So your suppression list that you do won't let our system call or receive calls from the caller IDs that are on your suppression list. TrackDrive also has our own global suppression list. So we don't allow any calls to go out from that suppression list, and when you create an offer, you could import, you could say that you'll allow incoming calls to happen that are on the TrackDrive suppression list, or you can block them as an option when you're setting up your offers. So the suppression list that we have for global always blocks outbound or text messages out, and you can optionally block incoming calls from our global suppression list. But this suppression list here is referring only to this buyer. So this buyer might give you a list of numbers that he's saying, I've already got these from other publishers, I don't want them from you, you'd just be duping up, or for whatever reason he gives you a list to suppress, but it's not a list you want to suppress against all of your offers or other buyers. So that's what that is there. So you could add a new suppression list right here. It's pretty easy to follow along if you do add a suppression list. So this is the attributes section, and all I'm going to go over on this video, I have other videos that you'll see for these other sections of the buyer.